Hello, everyone, and welcome to another national edition of the Armstrong Williams Show. Thank you so much for joining us. We welcome back Luis Martinez, Washington correspondent for NTD, Manaigo, managing partner, Global Political Solutions, and Jarrett Stepman, who's a columnist for the Daily Signal. What needs to change? You know, everybody talks about Ukraine, Israel, Iran, Russia. But there's so much more that's going on the foreign front. What are we not talking about enough, Aaron?
Our own backyard, Armstrong, right here in the Western Hemisphere. We are consistently for the last 6 years or so been losing ground and been subject to the encroachments of China, Russia, and other actors that are not necessarily our friends or at best strategic competitors have been making big inroads into Latin America and the Caribbean. And this is something that I'm really hoping that the incoming Trump administration will pay close attention to.
What about you, Stepman? What do you see that is just being overlooked with our foreign policy?
Yeah, that's actually a huge one. And I think where our eyes are oftentimes fixed around the globe, having a porous southern border. I mean, if we want to continue being a great superpower, you can't have chaos right on your own front doorstep, and that has major implications. We now have issues with Chinese nationals coming into the United States, snooping around U.S. military bases. A number have been caught taking pictures, trying to scope out American military facilities. These are deeply concerning things. And I think the fact that the last 4 years we've had a chaos at the border, we have a lot of unknown people coming to the United States who could be terrorists, who could be agents on behalf of great national powers, that's deeply concerning. And if we want to continue with our place in the world, that has to be significantly addressed in the immediate future.
Louis, what have we learned from the reaction of foreign leaders to Donald Trump being re-elected? Give us some insights into the major players.
Well, the first thing that we need to comment about the world this time around, it's not 2016. The world already knows what Donald Trump, presidency of Donald Trump looks like. So the world is better prepared. And they also know that Donald Trump is has a transactional foreign policy. So when we talk about Russia, China, Iran, and even the communist dictatorships in Latin America of Cuba, Nicaragua, and Venezuela, all of these players are going to start to strategize on how to find a transactional solution to their enmity with the United States, or otherwise face, of course, all the retaliation that Trump has already foreshadowed with tariffs and a bolder foreign policy coming from D.C.
What do you think that Trump needs to do first? I actually think that he will continue giving some money to Ukraine, even though Blinken gave him almost $200 billion before the clock ran out on them. Where can he have the greatest impact quicker?
I think where he can have the greatest impact is what he's already said. I'm going to bring these players to the table, and we're going to sit down, and we're going to have a conversation. And we're going to see what's in the art of the possible to resolve this situation, resolve this conflict in the Ukraine, between Russia and Ukraine. He's going to bring Zelensky, he's going to bring Putin to the table and have earnest discussions around this subject. This was attempted several years ago. It was quashed by the powers that be. We possibly could have been a lot further towards finding a sensible resolution to what's going on, but there are certain influential individuals that seem to not have wanted that to be the case. I think with Trump coming in, and certainly the position of his vice president coming in now, J.D. Vance, who has said under no uncertain terms that he believes that we need to stop writing blank checks to the Ukraine and find out, what is it that we can do to bring, some kind of peace into that situation and bring NATO back under control.
So, Jarrett, what do you see as the most pressing foreign policy challenges that Trump will face in this new term?
I think there really has been, there's no question, especially since 2020, there really seems to be a gathering storm around the world. We have a number of conflicts that have opened up during the Biden administration. Biden has a lot of tough words oftentimes for these other countries, but I think there's a lot of feeling that there's really not much behind those words. I think the U.S., if we want to be credible as a superpower, we do have to very much prioritize in the things that we do best at and is most necessary, especially about countering China, which is truly a competitor like no other country is. But it's also about strengthening allies and finding the best allies and ensuring that they can counter the threats that we have. I mean, it doesn't do us any good to simply flatter our allies. It's good to have strong allies. I think some have proven to be so, some like Israel, some like Poland that have greatly increased their defense spending in recent years. Those are strong allies. We should want our other allies to be the same way if we actually want to counter the very serious threats we do have around the globe now.
So, Jarrett, Louis, and Aaron, we're going to take a break, pay some bills, and we'll come back and continue this conversation. I'm Armstrong Williams. What we want to do now is take a look at the appointments that the president-elect has made thus far in terms of who will become his foreign policy team, which will instruct us in exactly his foreign policy agenda. We'll start with you, Aaron.
Well, Armstrong, there's the old political idiom that suggests that personnel is policy. And when we look at the people that President Trump has already brought in to head up his foreign policy between Marco Rubio, Congresswoman Stefanik, Tulsi Gabbard, and others, we see a picture taking shape right now on how he is going to handle foreign policy. And it's certainly not going to be a lead from behind type foreign policy strategy. And he's even suggested it. He's going to have peace through strength. And I think he's putting people in place that are going to lead and demonstrate a notion of peace through strength as they go out and negotiate with their counterparts around the world.
Let's talk about his Department of Defense selection.
Yeah, well, it caught many people by surprise. He is
including you,
including me, correct? Peter Nexev, Fox personality, former war veteran, went to the Middle East. He's not a four-star general. He's not of the high ranks of the military, and he's also not a civilian who has served in Congress or the Senate or Intelligence Committee or has a track record. And I think that's exactly what Trump is looking for. I think he's looking for a Secretary of Defense that will talk to the rank and file, that will bring back a sense of direction to the military that is aligned with the policy of his administration. And I think if you look at, as Aaron was saying, the picks, the selections have a very clear direction. If you look at Mike Waltz coming from Congress, for example, he has been very outspoken that the United States needs to wrap up the war in Ukraine and the Middle East to focus on China as the greatest geostrategic threat to the United States. And we have Marco Rubio in the Department as Secretary of State. Also, very interesting pick. We were just mentioning here that he's a staunch China hawk, but he's even stronger and more, let's say, famous for his policies against the communist regimes in Latin America. That's Cuba, Nicaragua, and Venezuela. He's a Cuban American. And I think that what that also shows is that the United States wants to not stop reacting. If we look back at 9/11, that same day on 9/11, the U.S. Secretary of State was in Peru signing the Inter-American Charter. That Inter-American Charter had an article to defend democracy in the Americas. The Secretary of State of the United States had to fly back that same day after signing this commitment to Latin America on democracy. And then it was a 20-year reaction to the war on terror that drew the U.S. into the Middle East and pretty much threw the agenda that the U.S. had set for itself and for the world out the window and just reacted to what was happening in the world. So I think Marco Rubio is going to focus on Latin America. We have a southern border that needs to be solved, not only because of immigration, but also drugs, and also all the threats that are crossing, coming from China and enemies of the United States. So I'm particularly excited to see how the Trump administration, with Mike Waltz, National Security Advisor, with Marco Rubio, Secretary of State, and with Peter Nexev as a Defense Secretary, how they're going to address the Venezuelan crisis. Because Venezuela right now, even Marco Rubio said it, is a threat to national security. And he hasn't even ruled out, Marco Rubio in a 2019 interview did not rule out military intervention in Venezuela, given the parameters that what is coming out of Venezuela and the Venezuelan regime is a national security threat to the United States. Not only immigration, but also criminals that have been intentionally released, even transnational criminal organizations like El Tren de Aragua that are now challenging even Mexican cartels in their operations here in the United States. So I think the direction might seem aggressive the first 2 years of the Trump administration, but I think that's just the United States setting its priorities first in the international stage.
Well, Armstrong, I think I'd be remiss.
Let me. I got to get Jarrett in though. Jarrett, what does it tell us about Tulsi and the other areas that may concern you and also give you hope?
Yeah, actually, I like the fact that there are some differences of opinions within this cabinet. I mean, I think many presidencies in the past, you had something like a team of rivals, but with one very strong leader at the top. And I think actually that is what Trump is assembling with his team. I mean, he doesn't have people who are just united on all issues, but Trump himself will do a great deal of conducting of U.S. foreign policy. I think that's a good thing. I think Trump has always been strong in this area, maybe because of his background in the New York real estate market, having to deal with some very difficult people in New York City. And I think that's always been a strength of Trump. I think he's going to use the different opinions that he has within his cabinet and a real focus on having a grand strategy for the United States. I think for a long time we've been playing whack-a-mole around the world, but a real reorientation to prioritizing the threats that we have, a rebuilding of America's industrial base, making the American country stronger, is a major difference maker in how we deal with the rest of the world. And I think it's been absolutely necessary and critical. It's something that's been missing in our foreign policy for years. I think Trump really promises to bring that back, and it's a good thing.
Aaron?
So I was going to make mention that we've gone around the world in our discussion so far, but I would be remiss if there's one place that I think is of paramount importance to the United States, and that's Africa. And if the United States cannot have a half-pregnant policy as it relates to Africa, if we want to talk about curtailing China's influence, that's where we start. If we go back 10, 12, maybe even 15 years and we look at the precipitous rise of the Chinese economy, we can almost mark to the date their encroachment onto the continent of Africa, where they are there having unfettered access to all of the natural resources and the abundance that continent brings. The United States has to deal with our relations on the continent of Africa. That's whether we break it up regionally or however the administration intends to do it, but I think we have to have a focal point on what will be the U.S. foreign policy as it relates to the continent of Africa.
And on that note, we're going to take a break and return with some final thoughts.
It is easier to build up strong children stand to try and repair broken men.
The streets are plagued with crime, violence. There's a lot of poverty, and it's all a result of lack of education that's happening in our schools. So it really is a crisis.
We come from very different political perspectives, but we've come to the same conclusion, and that is there is a crisis in the classroom. Children are being deprived of quality of life because they're being deprived of a good education. We must solve this problem. It's incumbent upon all of us to join hands together to get this done.
We can't afford to wait one more day before we address these issues, because every day we lose another child.
Let's stop the politicking. Let's stop the games. Let's really do something to give these kids a real chance at life and being a part of that American dream.
We need accountability for funding. Many of the districts where you're seeing very low test scores, students graduating with very low literacy and math comprehension rates, they are receiving a lot of funding. So where is the money going where our kids aren't being adequately educated?
If you believe every child is deserving of a quality education, please go to educationjusticefoundation.com. So, Jarrett, what is Trump inheriting from Biden-Harris's 4 years of foreign policy?
I think he's inheriting chaos, a giant mess on the global stage, an administration that had no idea where to prioritize. I think that there's a huge mess, of course, going on in Eastern Europe. The Middle East seems to be on fire. And I think most worryingly of all, we have communist China, which has even said basically that it plans to be ready to take Taiwan by 2027. I mean, that's a deeply disturbing set of events that's setting us up for a great power confrontation that we haven't seen since World War II. And so I think Trump has an enormous challenge. I think that's why he's focused on bringing peace to Europe, to the Middle East, and a retrenchment of rebuilding the U.S. industrial base, which I think has very much fallen off. We are now more dependent on our allies than the other way around. And I think that really needs to change. I think the Biden administration has certainly left a mess. I mean, since 2020, I think things have really escalated. And I think that Trump understands the challenges before us. And I think that he has a very good strategy going forward to try to re-strengthen the United States around America first.
You know, Louis, what concerns you when it comes to the president-elect? Because I don't want people to think that not Trump is president-elect, that he's just going to waltz in on January 21st and everything's going to be hunky-dory. We just know that's not the case. We are talking about Donald Trump. What concerns you about him?
Well, my concerns with Donald Trump in foreign policy is that the U.S. has been a beacon of democracy for the world for as long as I can remember, and has been an example to follow. And I don't think that Donald Trump has portrayed himself as someone who thinks that U.S. foreign policy should be promoting democracy in other nations. And we know that he has spoken praise to leaders in the world that have had authoritarian tendencies. And as I mentioned earlier, I think Trump has also proven to have had transactional foreign policy. So what concerns me personally as having family in Venezuela and in Latin America is that his foreign policy decisions will be America first policy decisions, but not necessarily the best for some areas and countries in the world. Even if we think about the Russia-Ukraine conflict, for example, if I had a crystal ball, I would bet that what Trump is going to do is he's going to lift all the limits that Ukraine has on using its weapons on Russia, and that way Russia will feel the pressure and then they can settle a deal. But if that deal with Russia and Ukraine to reach a peace agreement involves Russia keeping some of its territory in Ukraine, then that's going to open up a chapter in world history where territorial conquest is again on the table, and we'll move away from a liberal world order. That might be good, that might be bad, but I think that would be my concern of a Trump presidency, is that I do think it will set America's priorities first in the world. I do think it will rule through peace through strength, but it might sow some chaos and divide the world into areas of influence instead of the liberal order that we've been used to, or at least imagined that it existed in the past 40 or so years.
So Jarrett, what about the UAE and Erdogan and Saudi Arabia?
Yeah, I think those are huge questions, especially when it comes to Turkey, which is a member of NATO, which has been a country that's, I think, been very much listening toward the Islamist side of things. And it is very concerning. We do share a lot of technology, military weapons with these countries. Of course, they are a counterweight in a certain extent to Russia, and I think we wish to keep them on good terms. But that is going to be something that Trump is very much going to have to deal with, especially a Middle East that is a very complicated region. We already do have a strong ally, I think, in Israel. And there's going to be a question, I think, and I don't know the answer as far as how Trump is going to deal with these countries that are sort of on the edge as far as whether or not they're actually reliable partners and allies.
When we come back, some final thoughts with our guests. I'm Armstrong Williams.
As a home buyer, you need a lender who cares about your home ownership dreams. United Security Financial has been helping families secure their dream homes for 30 years. We're a national fair practice lender that provides affordable mortgages and low down payment programs to eligible home buyers. To learn how United Security Financial can help you secure your dream home, call 1-800-373-4186.
You want to add more to the Erdogan-Saudi Arabia conversation?
Well, certainly, Armstrong. Something we have to look at that just transpired within the last couple of days is that Turkey has signaled that it is cutting off all of its diplomatic relations with Israel based on how things stand. And with respect to the Saudi royal family and the Saudi nation, they have signaled right away that they are really keen on getting the Abraham Accords back up and running and sitting down at the table with Israel and finding, again, reasonable ways that they can bring peace to the region.
What happens to BRIC and the almighty U.S. dollar, Jarrett?
Yeah, I think that that's certainly been challenged in recent years, and I think China's trying to assemble a coalition to challenge, I think, American economic dominance across the globe. I don't think there's any question about that. They've used a vast military buildup. They've made inroads, I think, in countries around the world. They'd like to create a sort of team of their own allies to challenge, you could say, the American global order. And I think that's why, economics is, oftentimes the primary role in foreign policy. We oftentimes forget about that. I think the U.S. becoming stronger and getting its own financial house in order is incredibly important to actually countering these threats. I think Trump understands that. I think that was something that was very strong about his first term in office, something that, we've seen the United States taking a step back in the last 4 years. But I think Trump does understand that. And I think there's a lot of potential there for the U.S. to have a resurgence vis-a-vis China and our threats abroad.
Mexico is showing a willingness to sort of cooperate to finally get these borders under control, Louis.
I'm personally concerned about the new Mexican government. That's a continuation of the Manuel López Obrador administration. Claudia Sheinbaum was under Manuel López Obrador's the entire presidency, and I think she already has expressed that she will support Mexican immigrants in the U.S. if they are subject to policies from the Trump administration that are not to her liking. We also know that Manuel López Obrador or the Morena party were not compliant with the U.S. In helping them build the border wall. So I think that the Mexican government is one of the, well, not the Mexican governments, the elements that have infiltrated the Mexican government are one of the most dangerous threats to U.S. national security. It's the largest economic border in the world. There's, I think, something around like $9 billion of goods passing every minute through that border. Incredibly porous, and now we have a government in Mexico that is allied with Cuba, Venezuela, Nicaragua, is friendly to the Palestinian cause, has cozied up to China in its Pacific coast. So to me, the relationship of the United States with its southern neighbor is one of the should be pretty much the most important foreign policy priority in the Trump administration. And let's remember, America's insularity and exceptionalism is because it has oceans on both sides and good neighbors up and north.
Aaron, Louis, Jarrett, thank you all so much for joining us for this edition on a thorough discussion on foreign policy. I'm Armstrong Williams. Yeah.